Well, good morning and welcome. How's everyone doing this morning? Good. Can we give a big welcome to everyone who might be joining us online? We are so excited that you're with us, and we look forward to worshiping with you live and in person sometime here at our campus in Geneva. Well, I want to say a huge thank you to all of you. Last week, or 2 weeks ago, we did our annual survey, and you guys just did an amazing job responding, and we're so grateful for that. The information is incredibly helpful for us, and you guys gave us a lot of great feedback, some really exciting things that came out of our survey results. Almost 84% of you invited someone to church or to small group or to Christ in the last year. Isn't that awesome? 84% of you. So that's really cool. And then the other thing that's really good and growing in terms of our body is that a little over 25% of our people are either coming to us from sort of an unchurched or an unattending or a non-Christian background orientation. And so that's really the heart and mission of the Well, is to be able to love people who are far away from the Lord into a real life-giving relationship that is perpetually growing. We say it, that we love people into deeper levels of relationship with Jesus Christ. And so I'm so thankful to each of you for helping us live out that mission and make an impact in our community. Also, we asked you ways that you thought we could make the Well better. Some of you guys gave me some really good ideas about my teaching. Some of you said that you wish my teaching was more expository, which, for those of you who don't know what that means, that is where you teach straight through a text of the Bible. Oftentimes when people use the word, what they're thinking is more, I wish we would just preach through a whole book of the Bible. And then others of you said, Jerry, I really wish you would be a little bit more topical and thematic, and things that are a little bit more true to our everyday situations, or that I know how to apply. Some of you said literally, I wish you would connect like the events of Scripture more to the events that are happening historically in our world, all the time, at least 2-3 times a week. Someone will come up to me. They're like, Jerry, what do you think the war in Israel means? Or Jerry, what do you think the war in Iran means? And I always tell them, I love theology, I study prolifically, but I'm not a theologian. I'm pretty sure it means that there's a war in Iran and that there's a war in Palestine. So, a lot of times trying to make those biblical connections oftentimes leads people into error, because it's very difficult for us to see that thing from a front-sighted orientation. And so you have to be really careful with that kind of stuff. And then others of you are saying, Jerry, I really wish you were talking about the things that are happening in my everyday life that apply to my life at work and those kinds of things. And I just want to assure you, we're always trying to do all of those things with whatever text we feel like the Lord has laid on our heart. And we love expository preaching. In 24 and 25, we took almost the entirety of those 2 years just preaching straight through the Gospels. We did them in tandem and parallel rather than just picking one of them in order to get a more holistic view of Christ's life. But we also know that a lot of times when you're preaching through a text and you're every week you're moving on to a new idea, you're constantly hitting new themes, you're constantly hitting new information, and it kind of becomes difficult and overwhelming to be able to apply to your life. So what we like to do is we like to grab a text and sit in it for usually about a month. And so we'll take a text and we'll tear it apart for 4 weeks. And as we do that, just like anyone that ever wrote a commentary or spoke expositorily, we will bring in other texts, because you think about John's gospel or one of John's epistles, and you realize a lot of what John is saying is not new. It's something that had predated him. It was written in the prophets, it was foretold through the law, or the idea, the concept exists somewhere in the Old Testament. And then as they were writing their later epistles, there were other writers who were coming along and writing at the same time. And so then we could take an idea from one of John's epistles and also take that same idea from one of Paul's epistles and show how each of them give us a new appreciation, a new sort of perspective on a particular idea that we're looking at. And so as we're preaching through a text over more weeks, then we'll bring in supporting ideas as we try to break out those themes and hopefully, where it's appropriate, apply them to our daily lives, but also our historical moment. So we will always try to do that, I promise. And if I'm not doing it enough, you feel free to tell me or send me a note. I love your emails. They are so wonderful. All right, so today we are finishing up our series that we have entitled Starting Point. And the whole idea of this is really coming out of Easter and celebrating the death and resurrection of Jesus. We really want to understand what's our next step. Like, how do we use that as a springboard then into our lives? And so we've really been looking at the heart of the gospel and how we really connect to that in a life-giving way. Because the truth is that the gospel, the good news, the life, the death, and the resurrection of Jesus Christ, that is applicable to every season of our life, to every moment of human history, and to every area of our lives. There's no part of our life that is sort of sacred and other parts of our life that are secular. All of our life is supposed to be drawn out of and built on a foundation of our relationship and the reality of Jesus Christ. And so, if I can get this iPad to stay open. And so that's really what we're looking at. And our text for this series has been in Acts chapter 2. We're looking at one of what we call they were texts that were designed to sort of give you a summary. Oftentimes they're just called summary statements of Acts. And they're to give you like a snapshot of what was happening as it was building. You know, oftentimes you'll see YouTube videos and they'll do time lapse or something like that to help you see how things are moving. That was the goal of these summary statements. And so in Acts chapter 2, we have one of them. And it said, all the believers devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to fellowship and to sharing in meals, including the Lord's Supper and to prayer. Now, verse 42 is the key part of this text. In verse 43 through 46, it gives us sort of an expanded version of what it means to be devoted to the apostles' teachings, to meeting together in fellowship and building community, and leaning into personal relationship with Jesus. It says, a deep sense of awe came over them all, and the apostles performed all kinds of miraculous signs and wonders, and all the believers met together in one place. They shared literally everything they had. They sold their property and their possessions in order to share the money with those who were in need. They worshiped together at the temple each day. They met in homes for the Lord's Supper. They shared meals with great joy and with generosity. And this is like a re-summarizing and sort of a conclusion, all the while praising God and enjoying the goodwill of all people. And each day, the Lord added to their fellowship those who were being saved. So we have the summary statement and we have what was the outcome, what was the product of that. That as we come together with a longing, a hunger, a devotion in ourselves, dedicating ourselves to the Lord and to one another and growing in our relationship with Him, the outcome is this natural growth. It is the byproduct of healthy things, that our faith would grow, that our life would grow, and that it would have a positive impact on other people. So then, where do we kind of start, and what is our next step? I think a text that is really helpful as we think about that in view of first century faith communities is found in Matthew chapter 11. Jesus here is speaking, and he says this. It's a very familiar text. Come to me, all you who are weary and carry heavy burdens, weighed down, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and let me teach you, because I am humble and gentle at heart, and I will give rest for your souls. Come to me, all you who are weary, tired, faint, anxious, all of the negative things there. And learn from me, because my yoke is easy and my burden is light, and I will give you rest. So the question about what's my next step is a question that we ask all the time throughout our lives, right? We ask it when things are chaotic. We ask it when we feel directionless. We ask it when maybe we're going through loss or pain. But we also ask it oftentimes when things are going well. We want to figure out how to maintain the momentum that we're experiencing, or even better yet, how could we accelerate it? And oftentimes we think we need to bring in this perfect bit of information or this perfect technique or strategy. And I'm not saying that there aren't times and different strategies and ideas that are wonderful to bring to bear in certain circumstances of our lives. But what Jesus and his followers believed in the first century was that there was nothing in all of life that was more important or better to bring to bear in every season and every circumstance of our life than our relationship with Jesus. That Jesus' life, death, and resurrection would always be our next step. And so we've been going through this series. One of the things that we've tried to really establish is that our first step is not a task. It's not a series of behaviors or ceremonial rituals. It is actually a person. Jesus said, "Come to me," right? Not figure it out, not clean yourself up, not once you have all the answers. He just says, "Come." So Carrie and I have this great set of friends, Robbie and John Stunkel. They're amazing. If you don't know them, get to know them. She's right here on the front. She is glowing red. Wave at everybody, Robbie. She's so excited. She's shaking her head no. All right, let's give it up for Robbie. So we were supposed to go out with John and Robbie one time, and we were going to go do something that a normal adults do, right? We were just going to go have dinner. Well, Robbie texts Carrie, and she goes, "Hey, they're having Taylor Swift night at this particular bar, pub, or something. And what do you think about going?" So Carrie asked me, she's like, "What do you think about having Taylor Swift night?" And I was like, "What?" I was like, what is a Taylor Swift night? Is that where you go and they're just playing like Taylor Swift stuff? She's like, "Yeah. And people might be wearing, Taylor Swift swag. And we might be playing Taylor Swift trivia games and Taylor Swift bingo." There is Taylor Swift bingo. That's a thing. And I was like, okay, I'm up for anything. And honestly, we could have fun with John and Robbie we could be counting things and still have a good time. So I was like, yeah, I'm up for it. So we get to this pub, and I'm expecting, honestly, that it's gonna be empty, because how many fans could Taylor Swift really have? And or that it would be like it would just look like ladies' night, right? It would just be glasses of pink wine everywhere. And so I walk in, and it was the most surreal thing I had ever seen. Literally, at every table was an adult. They were about 82 to 89% ladies. And then there would be like a table full of young girls. And I'm talking like 12 to 14-year-old girls, young girls. And they're all wearing their T-shirts, and they're carrying Taylor Swift pillows and Taylor Swift blankets, and some of them were wearing Taylor Swift PJs. This was a bar. Now, the truth is, we had an amazing time, right? We really did. We were laughing. I bought the T-shirt. I have the T-shirt, literally. And we had a great time. But one of the things I learned that night is Taylor Swift's elite fans have a name that they call themselves. What is it? Yeah, way too many of you know that. Way too many of you know that. So yeah, they're called Swifties. Now, we have a name in faith. What are we called? Yeah. So there's this ongoing debate that you'll hear people having in the public square about whether or not Christianity is a religion or a philosophy. And the truth is, it helps to think about it in both ways. Christianity definitely has a religious aspect to it. We have all kinds of sacred and sacramental things that we do. We have ancient sacred writings. We have things that we do in regular intervals, just like communion, like we did earlier today, that we do as ways of reminding us and leaning into our conviction about Jesus. But it also has a philosophy to it. It has a way of understanding and thinking about life and understanding humanity and understanding history that is unique only to itself. But at the core of Christianity, it is a relationship with a person. The people who call themselves Swifties don't do it because they love Taylor Swift t-shirts, because they are deeply committed on a regular interval to finding somewhere that is playing Taylor Swift bingo. They do all of those things because they are personally committed to Taylor Swift. We are Christians because we are first and foremost oriented in a life-giving love relationship with Christ. In the same way that Swifties carries her name, and it just means we're one of them. Christian just means little Christ. It means we are with him and we are oriented towards him. You know, a lot of people come to faith out of a fear of judgment or punishment, a fear of hell. Other people come to faith because it's the family identity, right? We're all Christians, that's what we are. And those things are fine, they're good in their own way, but they always kind of fall short of what it was that Jesus really wanted for you. He wanted you to fall in love with him in a way that exceeds the way you fell in love with your wife or your husband, in a way that exceeds the way that you love your parents, in a way that exceeds the way you love your kids. God wanted us to have this really personal, intimate love relationship with him. And the same way that we would reorient our behavior or our thinking or our time or our calendar for our friends, the same way we would do that for our spouse, the same way we would do that for any other important person in our life, he's saying, I want to be that for you. I want to be someone that's so important that everything else in your life is springing from that relationship to me. And no matter where I look in your life, your finances, your time, your attitudes, your language, your behavior, your relationships, I can always tell that you have a relationship with me. The same way that people always know that we have a relationship with our parents or our spouses or our friends and so on. Augustine said this, and we've been looking at this repeatedly throughout this series. He said, God made us for himself. And the reality is our heart will never find peace. Our heart will be restless, chaotic. Our attitude, our emotions will be unsettled until they find their rest, until they find their peace, until they find their wholeness in Christ. So your next step isn't striving harder, it's not getting smarter, it's not doing more, it's just drawing closer into a relationship with Jesus. The way forward, the next step, is also something that is going to be learned. It's not going to be something that you instantly master. I met Jesus and I met my wife literally on the same day. It was like the heavens aligned, the stars sang, the earth shook, and everything in my life came together the way it was supposed to be. Now, Carrie took one look at me and thought, ew, you got a long way to go. And that was true. In fact, that first week we met the very first day of a Bible camp. It was the first Christian-oriented thing I'd ever done. So I'm at this summer Bible camp, and I'm like, oh, well, I want to fit in and be like these other kids. And I really did give my heart to Christ. And I was like, it's time to clean up your act. So I was like, I'm going to function this week at a 9.7. Bam. Well, my 9.7, as it turns out, by camp rules, was about a 1.2. And so even though I was on my best behavior, I got in trouble every day. In fact, the assistant director of the camp told me every day I was kicked out, that I had to go home. And then the older director would come along and he'd be like, let's give the kid a chance. He seems like he's trying. And they'd be like, we're going to give you one more chance. Then the next day I would get kicked out and then I would get to stay again. And that's just the story of my life. I didn't grow up in faith. So every bit of it has been a learning experience. And every time that I think I've figured something out, a couple months, a couple years later, I find out I only had scratched the surface in that area of my life. That's just the reality of faith. Notice in our text, Jesus says, take my yoke upon you and let me teach you. The idea of a yoke is a piece of wood that would bring two animals together so that they could work together and get in step with one another. Jesus is inviting us into his yoke. He's saying, listen, get in step with me. Learn from me, and you're going to be able to pull, to do, to experience infinitely more than you're ever going to be able to experience on your own. But it's going to be a journey. It's going to be a process. So if you're new to faith or you're thinking about faith and you're like, I can't do that, I can't either. Everyone look at your neighbor and say, you're not that good. Yeah, some of you did that way too fast with way too much joy. Dietrich Bonhoeffer said this. He said, when Christ calls a man, he bids him come and die. The idea is that we constantly are coming and learn to set our own things aside, that we're coming and learning to set our own agendas aside, that we're coming and learning to set our own ambition aside, that we're coming and learning to set our own attitudes about things, about life aside, so that we can let God's ideals really begin to inform and influence our life the way that he wants us to. So the call isn't to instant perfection. It is a call to daily surrender. So that's why it's so important that we are constantly coming before the Lord and being like, Lord, yesterday I started off well. I didn't finish so hot. I'm here to give it a brand new start. Would you please help me? That's how we lean in and we grow. The third thing is, I want you to know you were not meant to walk alone. You know, Carrie and I get a lot of praise. We get a lot of compliments because of the well, and we appreciate that. But the reality is Carrie and I didn't build the well alone, and we never could have. Johnny and Beth Johnson moved up here exactly when we did. They left just as many family and friends and security as we did. And honestly, for the early years of the church, I wasn't making hardly any money. Johnny was the one largely bankrolling the church. They were the ones giving time. They were the ones watching our kids. They were the ones, and if it hadn't been for them, we never would have been able to do that. And then over the years, other people came and were filling in all kinds of important ways. Years ago, we lost our roof. We would have never gotten through that if it hadn't been for John and Sarah Gilmore. As soon as we got through the catastrophe of the roof, we all went into COVID. We'd have never gotten through that if Scott Kirk hadn't been here. The small groups that you're a member of, you would never have experienced anything like that if it hadn't been for Michael and Whitney Larson. And the truth is, Carrie and I aren't doing this on our own, and you're not going to be able to do it either. John Wesley said this. He said that that the Bible knows nothing about solitary religion. There is nothing in all of Scripture that would lead us to believe that I only need to have a relationship with Jesus and that's it. Guys, that is the furthest thing from anything biblical. Jesus came to save people. That is individual, meaning he loves you, but it always is plural. God had a community in the nation of Israel. Jesus has a bride that is the entire church. And so we have to be seated and established in Christ's body, which is the church, all the time. And that doesn't mean that we have to be perfect. It doesn't mean we have to understand everything. It doesn't mean we have to be doing all the same amounts or giving the same amounts or having the same level of capacity. That's not what it means. It just means that each one of us comes and gives what we can and submits who we are to one another and is willing to take responsibility and the incredibly hard work of trying to help and lead and guide and love all of the other people at the same time. And finally, the beautiful thing, the thing that allows us to take just a clear breath is to realize that real faith, guys, looks like real life. One of the things you hear me say all the time is you have to figure out a way to normalize your faith talk. If when you say, when you're talking about Jesus at communion and you're using the word remembrance, unless that's the word that you normally use at work, like if you're like, hey, did you remembrance when we were hanging out last Wednesday? Don't use it. All of our Christianese is confusing. Sometimes it helps us when we're sort of having our insider moments in our insider conversations to speak clearly. But the reality is faith applies to every area of our life, and we've got to learn how to do that, how to speak to that. That's the beautiful thing that we see in our text in Acts. They were learning, they were connecting, they were eating, they were praying, they were leaning in their faith. They were being generous with one another. They were singing and celebrating together. And they were experiencing joys of their life. And look what happened. There was this deep sense of awe. Like they realized the power of community, the power of belonging, the power of the life and death and resurrection of Jesus, and the power of growth. And it actually caused a joy and a grace to well up inside of them that caused them to want to share that with everybody else in their life and in their world. And because of that, daily, God was adding to their numbers. C.S. Lewis said, don't waste time bothering whether you love your neighbor. Just act as if you did. Just make it a choice. Sometimes you love your spouse. Sometimes you don't. It doesn't change how we're supposed to be towards them. Sometimes you love your neighbor. Sometimes you don't. It doesn't change who you're supposed to be to them. You could apply that reality to every area of our life. So really quickly, I want to give you just 5 really practical next steps, and then I want to give you one overarching principle. The first one is you have to trust Jesus. That's the baseline of this gig. You have to enter into a relationship with Jesus that is trusting. Not just trusting that you're not going to go to hell. Not just trusting that if he was good enough for your parents, he's probably good enough for you. But like your own relationship with Jesus. You have your own relationship with your spouse. You have your own relationship with your friends. You have your own relationships with your parents. And you have to have your very own relationship with Jesus Christ. The second thing I want you to do is I want you to take our triple challenge. If you don't know what I'm talking about, there's a card in the back of the auditorium you can get. I'm going to explain it to you briefly, but I would still encourage you. Grab one of the cards on your way out. That way, if you get home and you're like, what did he say? I don't remember. Something about his wife? You'll have this as sort of a point of reference. But I wouldn't have a relationship with my kids if I never spoke to them and if I never listened when they were trying to speak to me. I wouldn't have a relationship with my team. I wouldn't have a relationship with the elders. There would be no relationship in my life if I wasn't in regular intervals sitting down, talking with them, and letting them speak to me. That's the triple challenge. We want you every day, and the consistency is more important than the quantity. We want you every day to set aside 2, 3, 5 minutes of your day and read your Bible. If you're not sure where to read, there are tons of great apps out there that have reading plans, reading programs. You can pick one. If you need help, please ask me or someone in your small group or one of the staff or elders or just the person sitting in front or behind you. and they can give you some ideas about where to start. But just read for 3 to 5 minutes a day, and then I want you to take that same amount of time, that same 3 to 5 minutes, and you're going to talk to the Lord. You're going to let him know what's going on in your life. You don't have to say it any particular way. You don't have to use a certain kind of language. You can just be like, yesterday was rough, Jesus. I'm not feeling today's going to be much better. Could you help me? Could you give me the energy? Could you give me the thought? Whatever it is. Or maybe it's like, God, today's going to be awesome. I'm going to need tons of high fives. Could you send them my way? And then we want to take the same amount of time, that 3 to 5 minutes, and we want to just sort of listen. Be quiet, still yourself, listen, and try to write down, try to journal what you feel like the Lord is saying to you, and then grow that. If you start with 2-2-2, you're doing 6 minutes a day, then maybe after a few months, grow it to 4-4-4 and be doing it for 12 minutes a day, and then grow it to 15 minutes a day. You may never get to an hour a day, but you just want to grow that time, and it will grow in meaning and importance to you as you do it consistently. The third thing I want you to do, if you've never done it, is I want you to be baptized. I know I should have told you this 2 weeks ago. I'm sorry. But I want you to be baptized. For those of you who were here last week and saw it, baptism is a public stake in the ground. It is a public profession that I am one of his. I'm a Christian. I'm a little Christ. I'm a person who's so wildly in love with Jesus that it has changed everything else in my life. Number 4, I want you to be in community, which means you have to be here. On average, you guys attend 3 times every 2 months. That's the worst. That's the truth. It's not enough. Could you imagine eating 3 days out of the week? Or drinking 3 times a day? The reality is we need to be in constant fellowship. We need to be in constant worship. It's not that we're going to be at everything. You can't be at everything. I'll tell you a secret. I don't go to everything. But we orient our lives to this. So this isn't something we do when we have time. This is something we carve out time for. The same thing is true of small groups. You got to be in a small group. You have to be in a small group. You have to be in a small group. You have to be in a small group. And I know some of you are thinking, Jerry, I don't like small groups. That's okay, I'll forgive you. You have to be in a small group. You will never really understand what it means to be in the body until you are doing life with someone so closely that when something is going wrong with their life, you feel the weight of it. And you will never know what it means to be in the body until you're in a tight-knit group of close friends, so much so that when something is weighing on your life, you feel lightened and lifted by their support and by their prayers. You have to be in community. And the last thing is you need to serve. You need to find a way to put your gifts to use for the body, in the body. Now that might be something here in our local church, might be in the community in the same way. Either way, but oftentimes you don't even know yourself fully until you start leaning in and serving and giving your gifts in a way that are meaningful and life-giving. And the last thing is this, wherever you are on your journey, you need to lead others in this journey from right where you are. Maybe you're like, Jerry, I just said, I haven't been baptized. I just entered into a love relationship with Jesus. Well, great. You can help someone take the first step. Some of you are thinking, Jerry, I did everything on the list. Well, now it's your job to help lead and walk those same steps with other people. And you're going to do that over and over and over because that's the way of Jesus. That's a life-giving relationship with him. So the team is coming to lead us in a time of worship. This is the moment when we allow Jesus to speak to our hearts. This is the moment that we've been building to all morning. This is when we say, hey God, maybe my time, maybe my calendar, maybe my relationships, Maybe my view of finances or the world or whatever. Maybe it's being more impacted by other things than it's being impacted by you. Would you just help me reorient that? Away from my attitudes to your attitudes. Away from my ambition to your ambition for my life. Away from my ideals to your ideals. Will you reform me? To help you, we've created some touch points around the room. If you'd like, you can go light a prayer candle. We'll have prayer teams up here in the front. You can pray at your seat. Or maybe you know there's something that's been holding you back. You know what it is. You just have to say it. I would encourage you today, write that thing down on a piece of paper and pin it to one of the crosses as a physical act of alignment and agreement with what the Lord is speaking to your heart. But whatever you choose to do in these closing moments, don't miss them. The Lord is here. Would you pray with me? Lord Jesus, we thank you so much for your life and your love. God, you really have given us everything that we need. Help us not to clutter it with our own ideas. God, not to hold back in terms of our relationship with you. And Lord, to share everything that you have given us with everybody who still feels weighed down and trapped in the dark. We love you, Lord. In Jesus'